you've been noticing some interesting surveys on the economy and what economists expect. What caught your attention lately?
Well, so as we recall, last week they released the new inflation numbers, and the good news is that the inflation rate has come down from last year's previous high of 9%. It's now at 3%. So it appears, good news, inflation is coming down. And the argument is, well, look, the Federal Reserve has raised what they call the federal funds rate, the interest rate that they control, 10 times in the last year and a half or 2 years. And so, the argument is they should declare victory and go home, that we're done with raising rates because inflation, is subdued and it's coming down, and, it's all good news. But, the interesting thing is that, the Fed target, of course, is not 3%. The Fed's target is 2%. And so we're not there yet. And if you look at the Federal Reserve, or I'm sorry, the Wall Street Journal does a survey of economists, and the most recent survey has that the Fed will raise interest rates one more time this year, and then that will be sufficient to cause inflation to continue to fall over the next couple of years, so that we'll be basically at the target by the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. So, they assume that the Fed has done, enough to accomplish the goal. And as a result, they assume that after raising the rate one more time this year, they're going to begin cutting the federal funds rate next year. But that produces an interesting sort of dynamic. I think, as I've noticed or commented on here a few times, is that we have what's called an inverted yield curve. And that means that the short-term interest rates, like the Fed funds rate, are actually higher than the long-term rates, like the 10-year Treasury bond rate. And normally when you have an inverted yield curve, which actually we've had an inverted yield curve since October of 2022, normally with an inverted yield curve, you end up with a recession. It can often take a year or so before that manifests. But if you look at what the Wall Street Journal economists or survey is saying, essentially they're saying, look, the Fed is going to start cutting the interest rates. The Fed funds rate is going to come down, but it's not going to come down as fast as the 10-year yield already currently is. In other words, we're going to have an inverted yield curve for 3 years. And so we have essentially a situation where an inverted yield curve would normally be a recession indicator, but none of the economists are predicting a recession. And yet this inverted yield curve is not only going to persist, it's going to continue for the next couple of years, and inflation is going to come down at the same time the Federal Reserve is lowering the interest rate. Now, I guess all of that could happen, but it would certainly be unprecedented. If you look over, sort of historically, in order to tame inflation, we've had to, push the long-term rate and the short-term rate back up so that the inverted yield curve goes away. And that goes away because inflation goes up and you have unemployment goes up and you have a recession. And so essentially the economists are optimistically predicting that we're going to avoid sort of the historical occurrence of events, that there'll be a continued inverted yield curve, falling inflation, no rising unemployment, no recession, and all of this is going to appear to work out. And again, everybody talks about, well, this time is different, and perhaps this time really is different, but it would certainly be unprecedented.